All right, welcome everybody. This is the Natural Law and Regenerative Economies series. This is our second part two, which we will be covering the law of gender tonight. So this is just a reminder that anyone who is a member of the Karmic Margin Call Project Time Bank, you can log all of the hours that you're watching, spending this entire series in as a service provided. So you are providing this service. So if you watch this entire thing, you can log in 1.5 hours of a service provided under presentation, workshops, and that kind of a category. So you are earning credit for watching this entire series. So I just want to remind everybody of that. And if anybody has any questions about how to join that time bank and how to log in those hours, please just reach out to me offline. So yeah, I also want to make a mention to our sponsoring partner, Easier Ways. Randy Hyden was on our panel last week, and he's going to be on the panel for a future conversation as well. Easier Ways is a community where people get together and just support each other, really listen, and kind of silence that inner critic, so that we can all practice, self-love and holding space for each other. Randy had started that initiative as kind of like inspired by the 12-step program on the way to sobriety. So that's something that I'm going to be putting up the icon on here when I edit this video later. Please check out Easier Ways. So yeah, the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to introduce you to all of our panelists tonight. My name is Mike Schumann. I am in training to be an interspiritual minister. So this natural law series is part of my ministry effort, where we talk about the natural law, how to treat each other as equals, and how that will lead to the forgiveness of all debt and eventually universal basic income. So that's something that's very near and dear to my heart, and I will reveal more about that as we go on in tonight's conversation. I put together presentations with a lot of intellectual material about that, but these natural law conversations kind of help put more of an experiential, co-learning experience to some of those intellectual ideas. So I'll be just giving one little intellectual idea for every conversation. And so that's me. That's who I am and why I'm here. And I'm going to introduce you to our first panelist, Ray. Ray, please introduce yourself and yeah, just do about a minute or 2 minutes of an introduction to our audience.
Hi, I'm Ray. I use they, she pronouns, and happy to be here tonight sharing with you all on this topic. Um, I identify as genderqueer, so the topic of gender is really near and dear to me and is part of my experience on this planet. So I'm excited to share my perspective.
Good. Thank you, Ray. And then we'll go to Jared. Jared is our other panelist for tonight. I have a quick little backstory about why I invited Jared to be a panelist tonight. He had shared something that really intrigued me, especially since we were doing a lot of conversations about cults and cult values. He had shared a list of the 15 characteristics of white supremacy, and one of those was about patriarchy or kind of like what was the word it used? It was I read patriarchy, but more like a patronization or kind of like a parenting type of a relationship, which felt like a very kind of like a masculine colonial type of type of a scenario. So Jared and I had a conversation over the weekend about that, and yeah, just Jared, let's go ahead and introduce yourself and yeah, just what would you like us to know about you in a quick minute to 2 minute introduction?
Well, my name's Jared. I go by he, him pronouns. I am a chef, nutrition professional, professional brewer. Now I'm in liquor and wine sales, and 100% sober, which is fascinating. So it's interesting that you would bring that up earlier, Mike. I
Mm,
appreciate that and the support and the work that is being done for that. Um, but a lot of my mission in life and so forth right now is through my spirituality. I am an animist with a heathen or Norse cosmology, which traditionally holds a lot of very masculine and, dare we say, hyper masculine and borderline psychotic behaviors for many. Um, my goal right now and mission that I've been tasked with from spirits is to begin decolonizing and helping other European Americans move through their healing journey and help them become uncomfortable in the places that they are feeling comfortable and allow that process to begin. And then we can begin destructuring and decolonizing and breaking down these systems of oppression that we've put into place, especially through the modern pagan perspective. So,
Great. Thank you, Jared.
mhm.
All right. Very good. Very good. So we'll talk about law of gender tonight. And I'm going to ask this first part of the conversation will be between the panelists. And I'd like to remind everybody watching, everyone who is present here tonight as well, if you are interested in being a panelist on the future conversations, I do have a list and a synopsis of all of the conversations that are coming up within the next 3 months. So please feel free to look that over and just reach out to me if you would like to be a part of the panelist conversation, which usually starts in the beginning of our sessions together. So law of gender. I'm going to ask Ray and Jared, what comes up for you when you hear that one of the natural laws is law of gender? I was having a conversation with this yesterday with my ministry colleagues, and one observation that was made that gender really one interpretation of it is that gender really doesn't have much to do with the natural law. It's more about gestation. It's more about bringing what we think of as masculine and feminine energies together to create. What I associate with the law of gender is that we all have masculine and feminine qualities. And part of what we see, what I interpret as the struggle that we see with a lot of gender identity issues and gender conflicts is when there's an imbalance, when there's an imbalance of those energies. So that's what comes up for me to open up this conversation is about how do we respect both the sacred masculine and the sacred feminine, so that we can create something, create something new and better and different and more. So that's what comes up for me when I think of law of gender. And Ray and Jared, I will open it up to you. What comes up for you when considering one of these natural laws is law of gender?
I was waiting for a car to pass by. So I think there's a lot that comes up for me about gender, but I think for this, I think one of the things that comes up right now, just because Jared had mentioned decolonizing, I live next to a highway, is that the gender from a spiritual perspective is different than gender from a cultural perspective. And the way that most of us grew up in the Western world, we were programmed with very specific ideas about gender because gender is weaponized in our society as a means of control. It's a construct that's a part of the patriarchy. So part of my journey as a genderqueer person has been exploring, like, what does gender mean to me and how does it impact me? And it kind of started with from a feminist perspective of like, well, what does being a woman mean, and does that define who I am? And no, it doesn't. And well, okay, but everybody's masculine and feminine, right? So all these questions came up, and I kind of think of gender as this spectrum, like a rainbow. So it's not a binary. It's not like one or the other. It's in a prism, you have an infinite number of colors, some that we can't even see with our eyes. And gender is this sort of like human expression, right? And spiritually, the masculine and feminine are kind of like in the Tao. You see that Taoist symbol with the yin and the yang, and there's the reason that symbol is so amazing to me is that inside of the yin there is the yang, and inside of the yang there is the yin. So it's like everything, and it kind of goes back to the oneness conversation too. But those are the like basic things that come up for me. And I'll pass it to Jared.
Great, thank you.
I agree completely with that. I'd even go on board as to add an additional one where you say culturally and spiritually, and that's with the introduction of the American Medical Association and other forms of modern medicine, where we move into this place of um, linear thought, that there's only this one right way of thinking, and it's either male or female. And when you look at it under a microscope from a biological perspective, that is how those chromosomes are broken up, and that is how those things, but it doesn't take into account the spirituality behind it. It doesn't take into account the soul, that movement of energy and the individual consciousness of that person that has been lost with the introduction of modern medicine, with the introduction of um, white Christianity. These areas and aspects have been what has pushed us into this linear thinking, that it has to be this way, that develops the cultural and social norms that have been recognized since probably the here in the US since conception, really. Um, so, I mean, yeah, I would like to add even that aspect. And I grew up and became aware of this perspective in the 80s and into the 90s. And I very distinctly remember driving home with some friends, and they had a TV in their van. And that was very exciting. I was probably 8. And there was an episode of some soap opera on where a woman was leading a rally about how she hated men. And to me, this was this birth of feminism and the birth of toxic femininity. And we see the pendulum swinging back and forth constantly of toxic masculinity, toxic femininity, but there's never a balance. We've never been able to achieve this point of recognition that both sides are of merit, both sides are valid, and that there is this um, third place where everybody can reside, where we are who we are, and not what society tells us, and not what medicine tells us, but who we are from our heart space, who our soul is, what our soul is. And that aspect is very much missed, but is starting to come into place. So it's really nice and refreshing and exciting to see that evolution. It's not even an evolution; it is a remembrance as to who we are and who we are, where we are at this moment in time. If I was able to answer that question, or do you have any thoughts on that, Ray?
Yeah, I really love that you brought that perspective of the medical industry. I think it's sort of the scientific thought from like the 18th century where they kind of like left behind the idea of the spirit, and it science in general and medicine became very materialistic and kind of like narrowed in on let's only talk about the things that we can measure,
Right,
which on one hand I can see, like, okay, we if we lost our spiritual ability to perceive what is beyond physical like reality, um perception I should say, because there is a reality beyond our perception, but like if we're only measuring what we can perceive with our physical, you know, senses, then of course we're going to limit science because science is based on observation. And if we don't expand our capacity for spiritual observation and we don't awaken those abilities in ourselves, then we really can't measure anything. and it's hard to compare notes with other people because they might not be perceiving the same thing.
Right.
It's harder to have accountability that way. So I would say that's the tricky part when it comes to science and medicine. But I'm glad you brought that.
And
Yeah.
so much of that to me is the language, just like you're saying. We don't have a common language. We have a common language in mathematics. We have one in chemistry. We have one in well, we tried to in written language with Esperanto, and so looking back in the day. Um, but where we're where we are taking this today is a common language. The proper use of pronouns to identify how people feel within, and how they are projecting themselves and who they truly are. Um, this language has resistance against it, and that's where the law of gender, I think, is really lost to many, because there's so much resistance to that change. And it really is decolonization. There are, especially here in the United States, many many different tribes. I couldn't tell you which ones, but many of them had a concept of the two spirit, where there were two different, or more, three. I think in Hawaii, there's actually three different genders in that tradition. But the depletion of that, the erasure of that, um, feeds into that 100%, that resistance of, because it's unfamiliar. It's been made unfamiliar. It's been taken away.
Yeah, thank you, Jared. What I'm going to do now here is I just want to add one more thought to this, and then I want to open it up to everybody here who is listening. If you have, we're going to turn this into a living library conversation, and I had introduced that concept in the last week with the divine oneness conversation. If anybody who is listening here, if you would like to reflect back what you heard Ray or Jared say. What did you appreciate about what they offered? What resonated? If there was something that is, something that you're still working through or something you're not clear about, would you like to ask anybody a clarifying question? So I'd like to open that up to anybody here. I'm going to put my view back on gallery so I can see everybody. And Hemant is joining us. Hello, Hemant. Welcome back. Yeah, so no problem. So while everybody's kind of reflecting and taking that in, one of the things that I'll be mentioning later on in this conversation as well too, is back in the Egyptian mystery schools, they used to have what was called the right and the left eye of Horus schools. So the left eye, which corresponded to the right brain, was the left eye of Horus school, which was more about the creativity, more about the emotions, the feelings, the facing your fears. So that was kind of the feminine aspect. The right eye of Horus, which was corresponding to the left brain, was where you would learn sacred geometry and the math and the conceptual part of it. And it was not until you kind of you mastered both sides that you were allowed into the third eye of Horus school. So the ability to be able to perceive spirit and the ability to be a seer, was dependent upon developing the balance between the masculine and feminine energies. So I'll kind of dig more a little bit into that later on when we have our group conversation. But before I go into my PowerPoint, would anyone like to offer up a thought or a feeling or a question about what you've heard here so far?
Mike,
Sure.
can I go
Yes,
ahead?
go ahead, please do, Hemant.
Yeah, when Ray said it, she nailed it. Just science is just based on observation. It removes us from seeing the reality as it is. Because whenever we see from mm, we usually perceive, not see. Okay, let's go with that. Whenever perceive, what happens is we just view one side of reality and think, this is reality. But when she put it in that way, she just made me so much clear. It makes sense. Thanks for that, Ray.
You're welcome. I'm glad.
I like to share. I see your mouth moving.
Yeah.
I really resonated with sharing about a remembrance and how um, just law that has is with us here and now is something we are remembering. It's something that's been here since conception, you said, and it's easy for us to feel the societal structures and the pull and tug of this and that, but it's always been within us, all of it, all along. I really appreciated that. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Neff. I kind of think of it like a dance, this dance between structure, the need for structure to feel safe, but also the need for freedom to be able to move. And some people need a little bit more structure, and some people need a little more freedom. And how to think of it more like a dance rather than a conflict. And that's that's something that we really want to explore is how do we make it safe? How do we make it safe so that we can make it more of a dance, not so much of a conflict? This is our flyer for tonight, the law of gender. So I am just going to give a little bit of an overview about where we are today and where we've been. Last week, we did the law of divine oneness, which was about how do we really treat each other as equals? How do we really see the God in each of us? So what we went over last week was the common ground in almost every religion was about treating others as you would like to be treated. And what that does is it also opens up a conversation about our financial system or socioeconomic system. So we introduced this idea of a living library where the challenge, the invitation was to reach out to someone and just have a conversation, not to try to sell them anything or to make them do anything or to convince them of anything, but just to listen. And in a living library conversation, one person is designated as the book. So they're the one that are speaking. They're the one that's speaking from their life experience. And the other person is the reader. So that's where they reflect back what resonates, what they appreciate, asking clarifying questions when something doesn't make sense. And out of these living library conversations, the invitation is also about how do we start to have the difficult conversations that are going to move the needle in our social class system. Some of the questions that we came up with was what is our responsibility to the billionaire class or those of affluence? What is our responsibility to those who are impoverished or disenfranchised? Other questions that we came up with is if we created a banking system where $1 of our investment would eventually cost the billionaire class $50,000, what feelings come up around that? Is it fear, shame, guilt? So these are some of these icebreaker type of questions on how to start to have those conversations about moving the needle with the social class system as far as money and finances and economics. Another question is if I were to ask you for a $25 loan, but I needed that $25 loan to make $1 million, how much of that $1 million would you feel entitled to? Let's have a conversation about that. Let's have a consensual contract, not a conscious contract about what do we feel like as equals we are entitled to. So that brings us into today's conversation, which is about the law of gender. And what comes up for me around the law of gender is that there is this dance between needing something of structure, needing something that's organized, that's solid, but also needing the freedom and the feeling and the artistic expression, to be able to be who you are, to be vulnerable, to be honest. So there's that dance, and whether you want to assign masculine and feminine properties to that, that's another conversation. So I'm going to introduce you to something that I found a couple of years ago to help people understand what exactly is this idea of ancestral mathematics. Because we have, if we go back 21 generations, we have 1 million men in our lives, and we have 1 million women in our lives who are our ancestors. Now, whether they identified as male or female or whatnot, there was that procreation, that act of procreation to make us. So I'll read this slide here. In order to be born, you needed 2 parents, 4 grandparents, 8 great-grandparents, 16 second great-grandparents, 32, 64, 128, 256, 512, 1000, 24, 2048 ninth great-grandparents. So for you to be born today from 12 previous generations, you needed a total of 4,094 ancestors over the last 400 years. And I'm going to make a quick footnote in here because I hope Nini, you're watching. She likes to make a note that it's not actually 4,094, it's actually 4,096. So I wonder if that's because maybe the 2 parents, the mother and the father, might have been taken out of that equation, but I wanted to acknowledge that. But think about it all for a moment. How many struggles, how many battles, how many difficulties, how much sadness, how much happiness, how many love stories, how many expressions of hope for the future did your ancestors have to undergo for you to exist in this present moment? And to just put that back a little bit more, so that's the last 400 years. Let's say we went back about 600 or 700 years with 20 generations. That's 1,048,576 ancestors or acts of procreation that's in your DNA. That's who you are. So I want you to take a moment to just kind of let that land. How many stories had to exist for you to be living in your story? Now, what if I were to say that there is a way to reach 1 million people in the same way? Let's say each one of those ancestors had an account, a bank account, and left you $1. Every one of them just left you $1. Call it child support, call it an investment in the future. That means you would have $1,048,576 today. So in the next couple of months, as we're developing this living library, developing this time bank, and implementing universal basic income, I would like to encourage everyone to open their minds that this is possible. So that is why the living library conversation is important. When you have a living library conversation, that's 2 people having a conversation for an hour, and that's 2 stories being told. So if you are spending a half an hour listening, you're listening to somebody else's story. You switch roles. They're telling the story. That's that's a whole 2 stories that are coming out. They pay it forward and do the same thing. That's 4 stories. They pay it forward. It's 8 stories. Let's say this happened every day. Everybody did this every day. Within 20 days, you would have 1,048,576 stories. Now, what if stories were hours? Let's say you spent an hour in a living library conversation. You spent 1 hour being the book, and you spent 1 hour being the reader. That would eventually become, over the course of 20 degrees, whether it's a conversation a day or 2 conversations a day, 2 conversations a week, 2 conversations a month, whatever it is, within 20 days, within 20 weeks, within 20 months, that'll be 1,048,576 hours, which is taken out of the exploited labor force. So one person, each one of you here listening to this tonight, potentially can take out 43,691 days of time from the exploited labor force. That is almost 120 years. That's the power of interdependency. That's the power of being a good listener, to being able to receive, being able to, to respond and receive to another person, and treating them as you were to treat yourself. So we're going to have a group conversation here in a moment. And I'm going to ask everybody to think about, what is the highest possibility you would like to experience in your life? And we're going to go around the room and we're going to ask, what does that make possible? We're going to go the creative route. To me, this is what is the receptive or the feminine. Before we go into that last part of the conversation, would anyone like to reflect, or would anyone like to offer up what you appreciated about what you had heard or seen, or if you want to ask some clarifying questions?
I just want to share that as you were sharing the part about the ancestors and then the part about the living library, I saw this image of a tree, and I think a lot of us may have seen this image before, where you see the tree and then you can see the roots underneath, and the roots and the tree are almost a mirror image, although I've seen some where the roots are actually much larger than the tree. But I was seeing this sort of mirror image of like the roots and then what we can do in like sort of a fractal.
Yeah, we talked about that a lot yesterday with my ministry colleagues about the fractals and how the fractals express themselves. Yes. All right, so I'm going to ask everybody, we're going to go around the room. What is the highest possibility, or what is the most inspiring possibility that you would like to experience in your life? And I'll start while you are all thinking, and then I'll pass it either to Jared or to Ray, whoever would like to take it after that. For me, the highest possibility is for this material, for people to watch this, to be inspired enough to have those conversations, because all it really takes is 1 to 5% of the population to just be inspired by it. They don't have to get it. They don't have to completely understand it, but just be inspired to reach out to another person and to listen. That would make my highest possibility possible, because that's the foundation, that's the roots of how to shift this socioeconomic paradigm. So that's my highest outcome. And as you all share yours, please, if you have a pen and a paper, please write it down, because we're gonna go a little bit. We're gonna go deeper with these. So I'm gonna write mine down. 1 to 5% inspired enough to have these conversations. So Jared or Ray, would you like to take it? What's your highest possibility?
I think for me, it has to do with, if these conversations happen, and when you get to the level of 1 million conversations, at a certain point, I think that people will start to lose the divisiveness that we have right now, that I think is holding us back from becoming a resource-based economy instead of exploitative economy, because you can't exploit people that you care about and that you've heard their stories. So for me, the highest possibility is that we would just collectively stop accepting all the levels of exploitation. these stories would allow people to understand each other on a level that would remove the divisiveness that kind of underpins that exploitation.
Thank you. Let's open that up. Let's open it up to the room. So let's say we lose the divisiveness. That was the first thing I heard you say. What does losing the divisiveness make possible? And I'll open that up to anyone who would like to respond.
I'll go.
Go for it, Charles.
I think for me, losing the divisiveness would start with figuring out my own divisiveness in myself. And where that comes from and what's all around that. What are the blockages? What are the things that I'm fearing around that? And what's it going to take to kind of look at that in myself?
That's a great question, and we're going to do what's it going to take soon. But that's great. So what I'm hearing is, what losing the divisiveness makes possible is identifying what is the inner divisiveness, what is causing that distress or that discord in ourselves. So we'll take it to that next level, and we'll open up to someone who hasn't gone yet. What does discovering your own inner divisiveness make possible? Go ahead, Christina.
Okay, so I was gonna go because what Cheryl said was close to what I was thinking. I was trying to figure out if I understood the question. But so I've been working hard at balancing the divine masculine and feminine in myself. With the hope, so after I do that, then that's the figure. When I see that in my head, I see the figure 8, infinity, whatever you want to call it. So that's receiving and giving, and it has to be balanced. So I want to do that. And then what I've been seeing is there's a third energy that's formed from them. And I'm working through that because I'm trying to do that with actually another counterpart that's trying to be matched, actually. And yeah, I've been digging into that. So the possibilities are endless, but she's absolutely right. It has to start within us. And I mean, being a collective consciousness, whatever we do for ourselves, it does rise. Was that, I think that's all I have, but did that answer your question? It didn't answer the question. But
What I'm hearing, and please feel free to change or to modify what I'm hearing. What I'm hearing is what it makes possible is a balancing of the divine masculine and feminine within ourselves. That's what I heard. Would you like to add to that, or does that feel complete?
Yeah, that's where the possibilities of creation, because I started with the feminine side, but then I wasn't good at receiving. It goes back and forth, and it's a balance, and it goes in layers. And yeah, we're creators, and we're trying to create, and that's, yes. I feel like that's how we do it.
Okay, so I'll open it back up to someone who hasn't had a chance to respond yet. What did you hear Christina say? And what does it make possible? If balancing the divine feminine and divine masculine leads to creation, leads to creativity, what does that kind of creativity make possible?